I was working the late shift at Walmart, stocking shelves in the toy section. It was quiet, as usual for this time of night. I was just minding my own business when I noticed a man in a hooded sweatshirt lurking near the back of the store. I tried to ignore him and go about my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. As I made my way to the next aisle, I saw him slip something into his pocket and quickly turn around to face me. I froze as he approached me, his eyes cold and calculating. He towered over me, his breath hot and heavy on my face. I tried to back away, but he grabbed me by the arm and pulled me closer. "I've been watching you," he said in a low, menacing voice. "You've been following me around the store all night." I tried to protest, but he wouldn't listen. He dragged me to the employee break room, where he had set up a makeshift altar. There were candles, a pentagram, and a large knife. He grinned at me, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "You're going to be my sacrifice," he said. I struggled to break free, but he was too strong. He raised the knife, ready to strike, when suddenly the door burst open and a group of police officers rushed in. They had been tracking the man for weeks, following his trail of terror across the country. I was lucky to be alive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting for his next victim. From that day on, I never worked another late shift at Walmart. The memory of that night still haunts me, and I can't help but feel like I'm being watched every time I step foot in that store. Despite my terror-filled experience at Walmart, I knew I couldn't let fear control my life. So, the very next day, I went back to work. I tried to put the incident out of my mind, but the memory of the hooded man and his evil intentions lingered like a dark cloud over me. As I walked through the store, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. Every time I turned around, I expected to see the man's menacing grin, but he was nowhere to be found. I tried to focus on my work and keep my mind occupied, but as the day wore on, strange things began to happen. Toys flew off the shelves and landed on the floor, seemingly on their own. Lights flickered and dimmed, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I started to hear whispers, as if someone was standing right next to me, but when I turned around, no one was there. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath in front of me. Suddenly, I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the back of the store. I ran towards the source of the sound, but when I got there, I found nothing but a trail of bloody footprints leading into the darkness. I followed the trail, my heart pounding in my chest, until I reached the employee break room. The door was open, and inside, I saw the hooded man from the previous night, his eyes blazing with a sinister light. He raised his knife and charged towards me, but just as he was about to strike, I woke up. It was all just a nightmare, a horrible figment of my imagination. But as I got ready for work that day, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What if the hooded man really was still out there, waiting for his next victim? Would I be able to protect myself, or would I fall prey to his evil intentions once again? I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and headed out the door, ready to face whatever horrors awaited me at Walmart. As I arrived at Walmart, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The hooded man was still fresh in my mind, and I couldn't help but look over my shoulder every few seconds as I made my way through the store. As I started to stock the shelves, strange things began to happen again. The toys flew off the shelves, but this time, they seemed to be aiming directly for me. I tried to brush it off as coincidence, but the feeling of being watched never left me. The lights flickered, and a cold draft blew through the aisle, making my hair stand on end. And then, the whispers started again, only this time, they were louder, and I could make out a few words. "Come play with us," the voices said. "We won't hurt you, we promise." My heart pounded as I turned around, but no one was there. And then, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, the sound of children laughing, but there was something off about it, something sinister. I followed the sound, my hands trembling, until I reached the back of the store. There, I saw a group of children, all dressed in old-fashioned clothing, standing in a circle around the hooded man. He was smiling at them, holding out his hand as if inviting them to join him. And then, he turned to me, his eyes glinting with malevolence. "Welcome to the game," he said, and I knew I was in trouble. The children started to move towards me, their eyes black and soulless. They moved with an unnatural grace, almost like marionettes controlled by the hooded man. I tried to run, but the children were too fast. They grabbed me by the arms and legs, pulling me towards the hooded man. He raised his knife, ready to strike, when suddenly, the lights went out, plunging us into darkness. In the silence that followed, I could hear the hooded man's breathing, ragged and uneven. And then, I felt his hot breath on my face, and I knew he was right beside me. "You can't escape me," he whispered. "You're mine now." And then, the lights came back on, and he was gone. But I could feel his presence lingering, like a cold, heavy weight on my shoulders. I knew then that I had to leave Walmart and never come back. But as I turned to leave, I heard the hooded man's sinister laughter, and I knew that he was still out there, waiting for his next victim. As I ran out of Walmart, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being followed. Every time I turned around, I expected to see the hooded man standing there, his knife glinting in the light. I drove home as fast as I could, but the feeling of dread never left me. I was convinced that the hooded man was in the back seat of my car, just waiting for the right moment to strike. As I pulled into my driveway, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was safe, at least for the moment. But when I turned around, I saw the hooded man standing in front of me, his eyes blazing with an otherworldly light. "You can't run from me," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "You belong to me now." I tried to run, but he was too fast. He grabbed me by the arm, his grip like iron, and dragged me towards him. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of an abandoned warehouse. The hooded man was standing over me, his knife in hand, his eyes burning with a mad intensity. "You're mine now," he said again, his voice echoing through the empty space. "You'll never escape me." He started to advance towards me, his knife glinting in the light. I tried to crawl away, but he was too fast. He grabbed me by the hair and pulled me towards him, his breath hot on my face. And then, just as he was about to strike, I woke up again, gasping for breath. It was all just a nightmare, I told myself. But the feeling of being watched never left me, even as I went about my day. Every time I turned around, I expected to see the hooded man standing there, his knife at the ready. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I received a package in the mail. It was wrapped in black paper, and there was no return address. As I opened it, a feeling of dread settled over me. Inside was a hooded cloak, just like the one the man had been wearing in Walmart. And a note, written in blood-red ink. "You're mine," it read. "Forever." The hooded man had found me. And there was no escape. As I sat in my living room, trembling with fear, I heard a knock at the door. My heart pounding, I walked towards the door, feeling as if every step was taking me closer to my own demise. When I opened the door, I saw a group of police officers standing on my doorstep. They asked me to come down to the station with them for questioning, but wouldn't tell me what it was about. As I sat in the interrogation room, my mind raced with possibilities. Had someone seen me with the hooded man? Was I going to be arrested for something I hadn't even done? But then, the detective walked in, a grim expression on his face. He handed me a file and told me to read it. Inside was a photograph of the hooded man, along with a description of his crimes. It turned out that he had been on a killing spree for years, targeting women who worked in retail stores. But here was the twist: the man in the photograph was not the same hooded man I had seen in Walmart. It was someone else entirely. The detective then explained that they had reason to believe that the hooded man had actually been a hallucination caused by a medication I had been taking. The fear and paranoia I had experienced had all been in my mind. I was stunned. How could this be? Had I really been living in a nightmare for all this time? But just as I was starting to feel relieved, the detective handed me another file. This one contained the medical records of a patient who had been taking the same medication as me. The patient had reported hallucinations of a hooded man, just like I had. But they had also reported receiving packages containing a hooded cloak and a note written in blood-red ink. It was then that I realized the true horror of my situation. The hooded man had been real all along, and I had unknowingly been a victim of his twisted game. As I left the police station, I couldn't shake off the feeling that the hooded man was still out there, waiting for his next victim. And this time, I knew that I was not alone in my nightmare. The days and weeks that followed were the worst of my life. I was consumed by fear, constantly looking over my shoulder and wondering if the hooded man was watching me. The medication that had caused my hallucinations had been taken away, but that didn't stop the nightmares. Every night, I would dream of the hooded man, his knife glinting in the darkness. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, but then I started to receive strange packages in the mail. Each one contained a different item: a lock of hair, a torn piece of clothing, a photograph of me taken without my knowledge. I knew then that the hooded man was still out there, still watching me, still playing his twisted game. And I had no idea how to stop him. One night, I woke up to find him standing at the foot of my bed, his eyes glowing in the darkness. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. He walked towards me, his knife raised high. And then, just as he was about to strike, he vanished into thin air. I thought it was over, that he had finally left me alone. But the next morning, I found a note on my pillow, written in blood-red ink. "I'll be back," it read. "And this time, there will be no escape." I knew then that I had to do something to stop him. I went to the police, but they told me there was nothing they could do without concrete evidence. So I took matters into my own hands. I started to investigate, to follow clues and piece together the hooded man's true identity. And then, one day, I found him. He was living in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, his room filled with knives and other weapons. I knew that I had to act fast. I called the police and told them where to find him, and then I headed to the motel myself. As I entered his room, I could feel his eyes on me. I turned around, and there he was, the hooded man, his knife in hand. We circled each other, our eyes locked in a deadly stare. And then, just as he was about to strike, the police burst in and apprehended him. I thought it was finally over, that I could go back to living a normal life. But even now, years later, I still can't shake off the feeling that the hooded man is still out there, waiting for his chance to strike again. As I sat in my living room, watching horror movies on TV, I heard a strange noise coming from the kitchen. It sounded like someone was rummaging through my pots and pans. I cautiously walked towards the kitchen, feeling a sense of dread building in my stomach. What could it be? A burglar? A monster? But when I got to the kitchen, I saw the culprit. It was my cat, Mr. Fluffy, who had somehow managed to open the cabinet and was now standing on top of my frying pan. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. But then, just as I was about to shoo Mr. Fluffy away, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was a shadowy figure, standing just outside the window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Was it the hooded man? Had he finally come for me? But then the figure stepped forward, and I saw that it was just my neighbor, dressed in a Halloween costume and carrying a fake axe. I breathed a sigh of relief, but then I heard a knock at the door. I cautiously walked towards it, wondering who it could be. When I opened the door, I saw a group of people dressed in creepy clown costumes, holding balloons and waving at me. I couldn't help but burst out laughing at the sight of them. But then, just as I was about to close the door, one of the clowns reached out and grabbed me. I screamed, thinking that I was being attacked, but then I saw that it was just my friend, who had decided to play a prank on me. As we all sat down to watch more horror movies, I couldn't help but think how silly and ridiculous it all was. But then, just as the credits were rolling, I heard a sound coming from upstairs. It was the sound of someone walking, slowly and deliberately. I knew then that something was very wrong. I grabbed a baseball bat and cautiously walked upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, just as I was about to turn the corner, I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. It was Mr. Fluffy, who had somehow managed to climb onto the bookshelf and knock over a lamp. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all, but then I heard a knock at the door. And this time, I knew it was no laughing matter. I slowly walked towards the door, the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Who could it be at this hour? Was it the hooded man, finally coming for me? I cautiously opened the door, my eyes scanning the darkness outside. But there was no one there. Just the empty street, shrouded in mist. I was about to close the door and go back inside, when I heard a whisper. "Behind you." I spun around, my baseball bat held tightly in my hands. And then I saw him. The hooded man, standing in the shadows, his knife glinting in the moonlight. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on mine. And then he spoke, in a voice that chilled me to the bone. "I've been waiting for you, my dear. Waiting for you to come home." And then he lunged forward, his knife held high. The next morning, the police found my body, lying in a pool of blood on the doorstep of my own home. No one knew who had done it, or why. But some say that they saw a figure, dressed in a hooded cloak, disappearing into the misty night. And even now, years later, people still whisper about the hooded man, the killer who stalks the streets at night, waiting for his next victim. And they say that if you listen closely, you can still hear his eerie whisper on the wind. Behind you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to hit the like button and consider subscribing to our channel for more great content. Your support helps us continue to create and share valuable information with you. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.